My testimony of all.
Madam Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time because the question is, congressionally directed funds have been cut. What are you doing to reinstate those funds?
And I also said in that testimony that we would abide by the law, and that's exactly what we will do.
Well, that would be to reinstate the funds. And I know you have this so-called simplified funding program that consolidates programs, including Title 4A, which I always lead the appropriations letter for. But overall, this consolidation, so-called consolidation, leads to a $4.5 billion cut. So that makes your statement untruthful if you're not doing anything to restore those funds. With regard to Title 4A, can you name one of the major categories in Title 4A where cuts will lead to a well-rounded education or world-class education, as you state?
Let me respond to one other thing that you asked before. And when you were talking,
This exchange was not subtle, and it was not polite. It was a direct challenge to the authority and credibility of the Secretary of Education. Congresswoman Suzanne Bonamici of Oregon confronted Secretary Linda McMahon with a blunt message. If you cannot faithfully carry out the law passed by Congress, then you should not be in this job. If you want reporting that breaks down what moments like this actually mean for students, schools, and taxpayers, make sure you subscribe so you do not miss future updates.
Oregon, Ms. Bonamici.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary McMahon, on February 13th, during your confirmation hearing, Senator Murray asked you, if confirmed, do you commit to getting every dollar we have invested in our students and our schools out to them? And you replied, well, the appropriated dollars and those monies that are passed by Congress, yes. And Senator Brooks asked you whether you would support any directive from the president to freeze funds that have been appropriated by Congress, and you responded, if they have been appropriated by Congress, those funds should be disseminated. Yet you stood by as Elon Musk's Department of Government Efficiency froze or terminated more than $1 billion in congressionally directed federal grants at the Department of Education, and you've made no attempts to reinstate those funds. So Secretary McMahon, were you not being truthful when you were testified in the Senate? And if you were being truthful, what is your plan to immediately reinstate these funds?
well, I thank you for that question, and I would like to perhaps explore with you a little further as to exactly which grants you were talking about. I believe
$1 billion in congressionally directed federal grants that have been cut.
And as I said, I would like to work with you and to understand exactly which grants you're talking about. I can also tell you that as part of my testimony of all,
Madam Secretary, I'm reclaiming my time because the question is, congressionally directed funds have been cut. What are you doing to reinstate those funds?
And I also said in that testimony that we would abide by the law, and that's exactly what we will do.
Well, that would be to reinstate the funds. And I know you have this so-called simplified funding program that consolidates programs, including Title 4A, which I always lead the appropriations letter for. But overall, this consolidation, so-called consolidation, leads to a $4.5 billion cut. So that makes your statement untruthful if you're not doing anything to restore those funds. With regard to Title 4A, can you name one of the major categories in Title 4A where cuts will lead to a well-rounded education, or world-class education, as you state?
Let me respond to one other thing that you asked before. And when you were talking about the cuts of $4.5 billion, along with that cut goes a great reduction in the cost of regulatory compliance.
Madam Secretary, I need to reclaim my time because I want you to answer the question about which category in 4A where cutting will lead to a world-class education.
I'm certainly going to answer your question, but also I think it's important for this committee and for taxpayers to understand that when we cut red tape for regulations—
I understand, Madam Secretary, I have to reclaim my time because you're not answering my question.
Well, I'm trying to answer your question.
The cuts have happened, and as Secretary of Education, your job is to faithfully execute the law.
Correct.
And if you can't do that, you shouldn't be in this job. I have another question for you. Since you've been in office, you've violated or stated your intention to violate several major federal laws that have been enacted by Congress. And one of them I want to talk about is the Education Sciences Reform Act. So that's what I'll focus on. Congress enacted the law more than 20 years ago and created the Institute of Education Sciences. IES provides evidence-based data to improve student outcomes and support teachers. But the Trump administration unilaterally canceled more than $900 million in IES grant funding and reduced IES staff from 175 to fewer than 20 employees, a reduction of about 90%. So Secretary McMahon, what statute authorizes you to unilaterally dismantle an office Congress created?
What we have done to the benefit of those grants is to, well, first of all, let me say that there are a lot of contracts that are done in IES. So none of those contracted services have been affected. And also, what is part of IES and the funding you're talking about are for NAEP? And the NAEP program is already in place for the next 5 years. However, we did renegotiate that contract and save $540 billion,
And you could do that with fewer than 20 employees, is what you're saying?
We are doing it because we are able to continue doing what we do because the contracted services which are still in place have not been affected.
Yeah, it's hard to believe that you can meet the statutory obligations without money or adequate staff. What do the NAEP scores show when disaggregated by income, by the way?
I beg your pardon?
What do the NAEP scores show when disaggregated by income?
When disaggregate, I don't
By
understand the
income.
question.
Okay, well, maybe you should look at the NAEP scores because what they say, you and the chairman and a lot of members of this committee use the NAEP scores to talk about how education is doing. What we really need to look at is
you
how we
talking about-
address low-income students.
Oh, okay,
because-
you're talking about performance and achievement gaps. Okay, I get it now.
Yes.
Okay. Well, NAEP scores, I think, continually show what we all know to be true, I think. I've looked at it in my state of Connecticut. It's one of the things that first got me into government. I looked at the achievement gaps, and that's what I wanted to make sure that we were servicing.
And as my time expires, Madam Secretary, what they show is that we need to have investments to help our low-income students succeed, and you are cutting those investments. And I ran for Congress because I wanted to make public education better, but not just for a few, not just those who are worthy of private dollars, and not just those in wealthy neighborhoods, but every single student. As Secretary of Education, I hope you would have the same goal.
I
yield
do,
back.
and thank you.
Bonamici began by reminding McMahon of her own words during her Senate confirmation hearing. At that time, McMahon promised lawmakers that any funds appropriated by Congress for students in schools would be fully distributed. She also said she would oppose any directive to freeze or withhold those funds. But Bonamici pointed out that since McMahon took office, more than $1 billion in congressionally directed education grants have been frozen or terminated, largely through actions tied to the so-called Department of Government Efficiency initiative. According to Bonamici, those cuts were made without any meaningful effort by the Secretary to reinstate the money, despite her earlier commitments. Bonamici argued that McMahon's own budget proposal, which consolidates several education programs, including Title IV-A, amounts to a $4.5 billion cut overall. Title IV-A is designed to support well-rounded education, student safety, and effective use of technology in schools. Bonamici asked McMahon a straightforward question: name one category under Title IV-A where cuts would improve educational outcomes. The Secretary never gave a clear answer. Instead, McMahon pivoted to talking about regulatory compliance and cutting red tape. Bonamici stopped her again. Cutting bureaucracy does not replace funding, and it does not educate children. At that point, Bonamici delivered the line that defined the exchange. As Secretary of Education, she said, your job is to faithfully execute the law. If you cannot do that, you should not be in this job. If you want coverage that explains why moments like this matter far beyond a hearing room, subscribe now and stay with us. Bonamici then turned to what may be the most consequential issue raised during the questioning: the dismantling of the Institute of Education Sciences. Congress created IES more than 20 years ago to provide independent, evidence-based data on what actually works in education. Teachers, districts, and policymakers rely on that data to improve student outcomes and close achievement gaps. According to Bonamici, the administration has canceled more than $900 million in IES grants and slashed staff from about 175 employees to fewer than 20. That is roughly a 90% reduction. Bonamici asked a critical legal question: what statute authorizes the Secretary of Education to unilaterally dismantle an office Congress created by law? McMahon responded by saying that many IES functions are handled through contracts and claimed those contracts remain intact. She also referenced the National Assessment of Educational Progress, often called the Nation's Report Card, saying its funding is secured for several more years and that contract renegotiations saved money. Bonamici was unconvinced. She questioned how the department could meet its legal obligations with virtually no staff and sharply reduced funding. Then she asked about NAEP results themselves, specifically what they show when broken down by income. That question matters because NAEP data consistently reveals deep achievement gaps between higher income and lower income students. Those gaps are not abstract statistics. They reflect unequal access to resources, support services, and opportunities. McMahon initially appeared confused by the question before acknowledging it related to achievement gaps. Bonamici closed by underscoring the point. The data shows low-income students need more support, not less, yet the administration is cutting the very investments designed to help those students succeed. Bonamici ended on a deeply personal note. She said she ran for Congress to improve public education for every student, not just those with access to private resources or wealthy school districts. And she expressed hope, pointedly, that the Secretary of Education would share that same goal. This hearing revealed something larger than a policy disagreement. It exposed a fundamental conflict over whether education funding passed by Congress is optional, whether evidence-based research matters, and whether promises made during confirmation hearings will be honored once power is secured. If you want continued reporting that connects these political decisions to their real-world impact on students, families, and educators, make sure to subscribe and stay informed.